Chad Ollinger had walked every inch of Blind Frog Ranch more times than he could count. The land sprawled out across the Uinta Basin like a tightly guarded secret, filled with bizarre anomalies, unexplained lights, and a rich history of legend. But no matter how many layers were peeled away, the ranch never gave up all its truths. And on an unusually quiet October morning, it decided to whisper one more. The recent rains had washed out part of the northern ravine, the same slope where seismic readings had long hinted at hollow pockets underground. Chad had studied those readings for months, convinced something lay beneath, more than just empty air or mineral veins. When the earth shifted during the storm, revealing a jagged opening in the cliffside, his gut tightened in recognition. It wasn't erosion, it was an invitation. He geared up before sunrise, bypassing the usual safety team. He wanted to be the first to see it, to feel the ground breathe beneath him without commentary or interference. The cave entrance was narrow, almost reluctant to let him through. A few feet in, the air changed, cooler, denser. The light from his headlamp flicked against ancient rock, catching faint mineral veins that shimmered like buried wires. The passage dropped steeply, almost too perfectly angled, like it had been carved with purpose. Chad kept moving, boots crunching on loose gravel, one hand dragging along the wall for balance. The deeper he went, the stranger the air felt. It wasn't stale like most caves. There was a subtle charge, as if the walls themselves carried a current. 200 feet in, the tunnel opened into a small cavern. At first glance, it seemed empty. Then his light caught the edge of something not made by nature. A carved stone pillar, embedded into the floor. It was half buried under sediment, but its shape was unmistakable, geometric and deliberate. Chad knelt to inspect it and noticed markings, symbols he didn't recognize, etched with precision into the face of the pillar. He took photos, circled the chamber, and noted more oddities. The walls bore what looked like scrape marks, not from natural shifts, but from tools or claws. There was no wildlife, no sound, only the quiet hum of something old. Behind the chamber, a tight crevice led deeper. Chad debated it. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, but the curiosity outweighed caution. He slipped through sideways, scraping against rock until it widened again into a narrow corridor. Man-made, he was sure of it now. This part of the cave was colder, and the silence more absolute. Dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed by any creature for decades, maybe centuries. Along the corridor were alcoves, each holding fragments of artifacts. Not gold, not obvious treasure, but objects wrapped in decay. A cracked tablet of stone with what looked like cuneiform, rusted fragments of metalwork, bone fragments arranged deliberately. As Chad moved farther in, the air shifted again. A low vibration began, barely perceptible, but enough to make him stop. The headlamp flickered once, then stabilized. He turned, shining the light behind him, but the entrance was gone. Not collapsed, just gone, like it had never existed. A slow pulse echoed from the wall ahead, and Chad felt drawn toward it. The corridor led to a final chamber, circular and domed, with a floor made of perfectly smooth stone. In the center stood another pillar, taller, darker, and humming softly. Unlike the others, this one wasn't buried. It stood untouched, defiant, as though time refused to erode it. The markings on this pillar were deeper, more aggressive. They spiraled upward, glowing faintly in the beam of his light. He approached, reached out, then hesitated. Something told him not to touch it. Not out of fear, but respect. Around the room, the walls bore recesses, each with the remains of what looked like offerings. Melted wax, metal shards, animal bones, and strange organic material he couldn't identify. Chad documented everything, but his equipment began to fail one by one. First the temperature gauge, then the compass, and finally his headlamp, which dimmed unnaturally even with fresh batteries in the failing light. Something shimmered on the far wall. A large slab of stone, leaning slightly forward, bore a carved map, or what resembled one. It didn't depict the ranch or the basin. It was something older, topography long vanished beneath desert and time. But in the center, unmistakably, sat an icon, Blind Frog Ranch, marked by a symbol identical to the glowing spiral on the central pillar. Suddenly, a sharp vibration coursed through the chamber. The pillar pulsed once, and a sound echoed from below, metallic, deep, and rhythmic. It wasn't an earthquake. It was mechanical. Something had been activated. Chad backed away slowly, ears ringing. The air thickened, a pressure building in his chest. He turned to leave, retracing his steps through the corridor, now slick with condensation. The artifacts in the alcoves seemed different, shifted slightly, as though they'd been disturbed. When he reached the original cavern, the exit had returned, but the light outside had changed. It was still day, but the sky seemed darker, the air thicker with mist. He scrambled out, breathing hard, turning to see the entrance collapse silently behind him, sealing itself with a slow, deliberate motion, as though the earth had inhaled him and then decided to spit him out. Back at the main camp, Chad reviewed the photos, but many were corrupted, glitched out in ways that defied explanation. The images of the pillar, the map, the symbols, all gone or unreadable. Only a few fragments remained, blurred shots of the corridor, the alcoves, and a close-up of the spiral symbol glowing against the stone. He shared what little he could with Dwayne and the crew, but they met him with skepticism. No one else could find the ravine he described. The cliffside looked untouched. No seismic anomalies registered since the storm. It was as if the cave had never existed. But something had changed in Chad. He began to experience vivid dreams of underground cities, symbols that spoke in frequencies, and faces not quite human, but not alien either. He became obsessed with recreating the spiral symbol, sketching it in notebooks, carving it into wood, tracing it into the dirt. Then one morning, weeks later, a second anomaly appeared. A deep resonance began echoing from the old well behind the barn, one that had run dry for decades. Instruments picked up the same frequency as the one from the cave. When they lowered a probe into the shaft, it disappeared from radar at 60 feet. The cave wasn't alone. It was part of a system. Blind Frog Ranch had always been a place of layers, of oil and uranium, of treasure and mystery, of native law and corporate conspiracy. But this discovery hinted at something older than all of it, something that had shaped the land long before the Ollingers ever set foot on it. Chad kept his findings quiet after that. He knew what he had found, even if the world didn't. The earth at Blind Frog Ranch had spoken to him, not in words, but in pulses, frequencies, symbols. It had revealed a sliver of something ancient and waiting. Not treasure, but knowledge buried so deep, it could only be accessed through intuition, accident, or fate. Hand beneath the hollow stone, the hum still echoed, waiting to be heard again. The morning mist clung low to the fields, veiling Blind Frog Ranch in a hushed stillness. Chad Ollinger stood alone near the eastern edge of the property, studying the digital readings flickering on the seismic scanner. The machine had been acting strange for days, spitting out inconsistencies, deep subsurface voids that weren't on any prior mapping. They shifted location, like shadows dancing just beyond reach. He moved toward a slope recently affected by rain and erosion, the ground soft and giving beneath his boots. A section of the earth had collapsed slightly, forming a bowl-shaped depression. Cracks laced outward in jagged lines, and in the center, a narrow slit opened into darkness, like a wound in the flesh of the land. Carefully, Chad set his gear down and examined the opening. It wasn't large, but it was just wide enough. He fetched a rope and a light, anchoring himself to a nearby juniper tree. As he lowered into the crevice, the air shifted, carrying with it a metallic tang, almost like blood. The light from above faded quickly, swallowed by the narrow descent. The walls of the shaft were smooth in places, too smooth for a natural formation. 40 feet down, the passage widened suddenly into a chamber. Chad's boots hit solid ground. Dust hung thick in the air, and silence settled like a shroud. His headlamp swept across the chamber. The room was roughly circular, its edges rimmed with blackened stone. Thin veins of iridescent mineral lined the walls, pulsing faintly when touched by the light. In the center of the chamber, a stone slab protruded from the ground, waist high, carved with symbols unfamiliar to him. They curled and spiraled like the motion of water or wind, some resembling constellations, others abstract and chaotic.